The waiting room smelled like expensive coffee and quiet judgment. Sterling Vance had driven 40 minutes to get there, through 2 construction zones and a school drop-off that ran long, because Lily had decided that morning was the right time to tell him she wanted a hamster. He'd said maybe. She'd accepted that as a yes. He'd let it go, because the highway was already backing up. And he had 12 minutes to spare, and some battles were worth saving for later. He found parking on the 4th floor of the attached garage. Walked the long way around because the elevator was out. Arrived at the front desk of Meridian Health Partners, with 8 minutes to spare. His visitor badge clipped crooked, his briefcase slightly scuffed at the corner, from where it had once been run over by a hospital supply cart at a previous job site. A story he'd told exactly once, before deciding it made him sound careless. The receptionist glanced at him, then at his jacket, then back at the sign-in sheet. She didn't say anything, but the look was the kind of look Sterling had learned to read in the way some people learn to read weather. A slight tightening around the eyes, the pen sliding forward without the warmth of a greeting. The careful attention given to something just past his shoulder. He signed in, pressed the visitor badge down more firmly, thanked her. She had already turned away. He took a seat near the window, set his briefcase on his knee, and opened the folder inside to review his notes one more time. Outside, the morning light hit the building across the street at a sharp angle, turning the glass into something that looked almost gold. Lily would have pointed at that, and asked why. He would have had to think about it. He still didn't know what he would have said. 3 years since Claire died. And he was still learning to answer questions alone. What people in that building did not know about Sterling Vance? Could have filled a room. At 41, he carried the specific exhaustion of someone who had reorganized his entire life, around a loss he hadn't planned for, and a child who needed him to keep going anyway. He had a daughter named Lily, who was 7 years old, who slept with a stuffed rabbit named Gerald, who had recently declared that scrambled eggs were for babies, and who cried exactly once when they moved out of the house she'd grown up in. Once, quietly, in the back seat, thinking he didn't notice. He noticed. He always noticed. That was partly the problem, and partly the only thing that had saved him. Sterling was a healthcare systems analyst. Not the kind people wrote profiles about. The kind hospitals called when their operations were bleeding money, in ways no one could locate, and no one wanted to admit. He found the leaks, he mapped the gaps between what a system was designed to do, and what it was actually doing. He wrote reports that told the truth without softening it. Administrators did not always like him. Results departments always did. In the previous 2 years, he had consulted on operational restructures at 4 different hospital networks. 2 of them had credited his work publicly. 1 had asked him to sign a non-disclosure agreement first. The 4th had sent a fruit basket. He'd given most of it to Lily, who ate 3 pears in one sitting and got a stomachache. He was not famous. He was not rich. Not yet, anyway. Not with Claire's medical costs still sitting on the back shelf of his finances, like something he couldn't quite move but couldn't ignore. He drove a 2009 Nissan Frontier, with a cracked dashboard and a back seat that permanently smelled faintly of crayons and apple juice, because that is what 7 years of carpool does to upholstery. He had been invited to Meridian Health Partners because they had a problem no one had been able to solve. He had spent 4 months studying it from the outside, quietly. The way he did everything, he thought he knew what was wrong. He was fairly certain he was right, he usually was. That morning, he was supposed to prove it. What happened instead began in the lobby at 9:47 a.m., when a woman named Renata Sloan stepped out of the elevator and crossed the marble floor with the posture of someone who had never in her adult life been made to wait. Renata was the chief operating officer of Meridian Health Partners. She was 52. She had rebuilt the organization's entire administrative structure. 6 years ago, when it was failing, she wore a charcoal blazer and heels that clicked against the marble floor with the rhythm of institutional authority. She had a calendar that was booked in 15-minute increments, and an assistant who had learned never to push back on anything. She said, in a tone like that. She glanced at the lobby on her way to the conference wing. Standard assessment, she did it without thinking. The way one checks the weather before stepping outside. Her eyes moved across the chairs near the window. The man in the slightly worn jacket with the scuffed briefcase. Renata Sloan had spent 3 decades making decisions in healthcare administration. She trusted her instincts. Her instincts had served her well. What she had not noticed, what she had perhaps never learned to examine, was the way those instincts were shaped less by accuracy than by pattern. And the pattern she was running now was simple. This building was not that kind of building, and that man did not look like he belonged in it. She stopped at the front desk. "Who's the gentleman by the window?" she asked the receptionist quietly. The receptionist checked the log. "Sterling Vance. He's here for the 9:50 with Dr. Okafor and the operations team." A pause. "Does Dr. Okafor know what firm he's with?" "He's independent, listed as a consultant." Something in Renata's expression resolved into conclusion. Independent could mean a lot of things. In her experience, the freelancers who showed up to high-level strategy sessions in that kind of jacket were usually not the kind who should be in those sessions at all. Someone had probably added a name to an invite list, without proper vetting. She leaned in. "Can you reach security and have someone quietly verify his credentials before they bring him upstairs? I'd rather not have the session interrupted." The receptionist nodded. Of course. What Renata did not tell her, because she did not feel it needed saying, was that if the credentials didn't check out, she didn't want him waiting in the lobby either. She had a pitch scheduled with 2 hospital board members from out of state arriving at 10:15. The lobby needed to look right. She continued down the hallway. She had, in her estimation, handled it efficiently. Sterling was reading through the second section of his analysis, when a man in a security uniform approached, and asked, politely but without warmth, if he could step outside for a moment. He looked up. "Is something wrong?" "There are some questions about your credentials, sir. We just need a few minutes to verify before we bring you up." Sterling looked at the man, then at the clock on the wall. 9:43, 7 minutes. "I checked in at the front desk," he said. "I have a meeting with Dr. Okafor's team at 9:50. "Yes sir, I understand. This won't take long. If you could just step outside." "Outside." He repeated it flatly, not angrily, just clearly. "Just to the side entrance, sir. Shouldn't be more than a few minutes." He thought about Lily that morning. How she'd asked him, while he was packing his bag, if he was nervous. He'd said no. She'd looked at him the way 7-year-olds look at you when they know you're lying but decide to let it go. He stood up. He picked up his briefcase. He followed the guard to the side entrance, which opened onto a narrow service corridor, and he stood there while the guard made a call, and then another call, and then asked for his business card, and his last 3 client references, which Sterling provided from memory, without being asked to write them down. The guard stepped away. 7 minutes became 15. Upstairs the 9:50 meeting started without him. The conference room on the 7th floor was the kind of space that had been designed to communicate seriousness. Long glass table, leather chairs. A screen at one end currently displaying a network flow diagram that nobody in the room fully understood, which was partially why they were all there. Dr. Priya Okafor, not in the used names file, sat at the head of the table. She was the director of clinical operations, and she was the person who had originally brought Sterling's name forward. She had read his work on the St. Augustine Health Network reorganization, and had reached out 6 months ago. She had followed his methodology closely enough to believe he had found what no one else had. She looked at the door, then at her phone, then at the door again. "Does anyone know where our consultant is?" Her assistant leaned in. "I'm not sure. He checked in downstairs about 20 minutes ago." 2 seats down, a board liaison named Hutchins looked up from his phone with the mild impatience of someone who had flown in from Philadelphia and had a 4 o'clock return flight. "Are we waiting?" "Give it 2 more minutes," Priya said. It took 4. Sterling walked in quietly, set his briefcase at the open chair, and sat down without explanation or apology for the delay. Not because he wasn't aware of it, but because the explanation would have taken longer than the meeting could afford, and because he had learned, the way you learn things when life stops offering you the luxury of reaction, to absorb the friction and keep moving. "Thanks for having me," he said. "Want to start with the flow diagram, or should I show you where the numbers diverge first?" Hutchins frowned. "The numbers diverge from what?" "From what your own reports say they should be. There are 4 places in your operational chain where resources are being allocated, based on projections that are 18 months out of date. That's where the money is going." Hutchins put his phone face down. Slowly, Priya sat up slightly. Sterling opened his briefcase, pulled out the folder, and began. He spoke for 35 minutes, not loudly, not like someone performing. Like someone who had spent 4 months in a problem the way a diver goes into water, fully, patiently, without hurrying toward the surface. He knew this material the way he knew Lily's bedtime routine, and the exact sound the Frontier made when the engine needed warming up, and the way the light changed in the kitchen at 7 a.m., when the sun came through the side window. He knew it because he had made himself know it, because that was the only way he knew how to work. The room changed. It happened in small ways first. People stopped checking their phones. Hutchins picked up a pen. The board liaison from Chicago, a woman named Darlene who had said nothing since introductions, leaned forward and asked a question Sterling had not anticipated, and he answered it anyway, completely, without stalling. The estimates were the moment that shifted the air. Conservative projection puts recovery at somewhere between 30 and 38 million over the next 2 fiscal years. Sterling said. If you implement the staffing rebalance in Q2, closer to 40, the delay cost is about 900,000 per quarter you wait. Someone exhaled. Someone else wrote something down. Priya was very still in the way that people are still when they are thinking very hard. What would it take, Hutchins said slowly, to keep you exclusively on this? Not just the initial phase. Sterling looked at him evenly. Depends on what exclusively means. Means we contract you before you talk to anyone else in this space. I'd need to get home by 3:15, my daughter gets out of school. The room absorbed this in the way rooms absorb things they didn't expect to hear. We can work with that, Hutchins said. He looked slightly thrown off, but he said it. That was when the door opened and Renata Sloan stepped in. She came in with her assistant behind her, intending to catch the final portion of the update before her 10:15 arrived. She surveyed the room in the way she always did, quickly, comprehensively, one pass, and then her eyes landed on Sterling, the jacket, the scuffed briefcase on the table, the man she had asked to have quietly verified and removed from the lobby. He was sitting at the head of the table's working side, surrounded by board members who looked like they'd forgotten the conference room had a door. She stopped moving. Priya looked up. Renata. Good timing, I was going to loop you in anyway. Mr. Vance has just walked us through a full operational restructure model that, I'll be honest, changes a few things I was planning to bring to you next week. Renata looked at Sterling. Sterling looked at Renata. He had recognized her the moment she walked in. He had seen her cross the lobby that morning. He had registered the pause at the front desk. He was not certain, but he was not uncertain. He said nothing. He did not need to. The room was already assembling the story without his help. Priya continued, unaware. He's projected a recovery window of 30 to 38 million. Hutchins is talking about exclusive engagement. Hutchins, to his credit, did not look at Renata when he confirmed this. He kept his eyes on his notes. But everyone else in the room was doing the quiet arithmetic of institutional instinct. Connecting the consultant to the lobby to the security hold to whoever had ordered it. Renata was a fast thinker. It was one of the things that had made her successful. She understood within about 4 seconds what had happened, and she understood within 6 what it meant. She sat down. For the rest of the meeting, she said very little. She listened. She asked one question about implementation timeline that was precise and relevant, and earned a small nod from Sterling, because it was a good question. But the composure she wore cost something, and it showed in the stillness she held too carefully. When the meeting broke, people filed out in the low murmur of people who have been given a lot to think about. Sterling began packing his folder back into his briefcase methodically, the same way he packed Lily's backpack. Everything in its place, nothing left behind. Renata was still in the room. Mr. Vance. He looked up. She stood at the end of the table, arms not crossed. She had chosen that deliberately. Her posture was straight but not defensive. She had been turning over what to say since the moment she sat down, and she had landed here. The truth, without the softening that makes it easier to say but harder to mean. I want to apologize to you directly. He waited. I asked that you be held downstairs before your meeting this morning. It was my call. I didn't verify your credentials myself. I made an assumption, and I acted on it, and I was wrong. Not just in the outcome, in the reasoning. That matters to me. Sterling straightened the folder, set it inside the briefcase, clicked the latch. Was it because of the jacket? He asked, not bitterly, genuinely. Renata paused. The jacket was the beginning of it. He looked at her for a moment. My wife picked it out. She said it was professional but comfortable. She said people can tell when a jacket fits right. He paused. She died 3 years ago. I haven't bought a new one because I keep forgetting to, mostly. And then I remember, and don't want to. The silence that followed was not the silence of a corporate apology meeting. It was something else. The kind that follows a truth that landed somewhere it wasn't expected. I'm sorry for your loss, Renata said, and she meant it. He could tell because it came out quiet, not performed, just real. Thank you, Sterling said. He picked up his briefcase. You asked a good question in there, about Q2 staffing. Most people skip that piece. She blinked. I've been in operations for 28 years, shows. He said it plainly. The apology was honest. I appreciate that. He walked to the door, paused. I'll have my attorney send over a draft agreement. If the terms work, we can start in 2 weeks. I just need to sort out after-school coverage. And then he walked out. In the hallway, Priya caught up with him at the elevator. Sterling. She looked slightly flushed, in the way people look when they have just realized how close something came to going badly. I want to say I'm sorry too. I didn't know about the hold downstairs until about halfway through your presentation. I put it together from context. I should have made sure your arrival was handled properly. It wasn't your fault, he said. It was my meeting. It was your meeting, he agreed. And you ran it well. That's separate. She looked at him. You're not angry. I was a little, in the corridor. He pressed the elevator button, but I was standing there thinking about whether my daughter would remember this morning as a good day or a bad one. She gave me this whole thing at breakfast about how the cafeteria makes the pizza wrong. He half smiled. You can only hold so many things at once. Priya laughed, a small, surprised one. That's a very reasonable way to be. I've had to get reasonable about things I didn't choose, he said. You learn. The elevator arrived. 2 weeks, he said. I'll have my attorney reach out. She nodded. We'll be ready. He drove home the long way. Not because it was faster, it wasn't. But the back route went past the park where he and Claire used to walk on Sunday mornings before Lily was born, and sometimes he went that way just to let himself remember for a few minutes. Without trying to stop. The Frontier's engine grumbled at one of the lights. The cracked dashboard caught the afternoon sun at an angle that made it look worse than it was. The back seat smelled like crayons and apple juice, as it always did, and always would. At 3:14 he was parked in the school pickup line. At 3:17, Lily came out the double doors with her backpack hanging off one shoulder, and an expression he'd learned to read as, something happened and I can't decide if it's good or bad. She climbed in, dropped her bag, buckled her seatbelt without being reminded, which she only did when she had a lot on her mind. How was your thing? She asked. Good, Sterling said. How was school? Fine, Mrs. Calloway says we're doing a project about communities. That sounds interesting. It sounds like a lot of poster board. She looked out the window. Did you get the thing? What thing? The contract, the work thing. You said this morning it was important. He glanced at her in the rearview mirror. She was looking out the window, watching the school disappear behind them, trying very hard to seem like she wasn't waiting for the answer. Yeah, he said. I got it. She nodded slowly, the way she did when she was processing something she'd been holding for a while. Okay, good. Were you worried? I wasn't worried. A pause. I was a little worried. About what? She shrugged. Just stuff. Then more quietly, Mom used to say you were the smartest person she knew. Sterling kept both hands on the wheel. The engine grumbled at a yellow light, and he slowed down, and the afternoon traffic moved around them at its regular pace, unaware, unconcerned, going wherever it was going. She said that? He asked, keeping his voice level. All the time. Lily looked at him with the directness that 7-year-olds deploy without knowing what it costs. She wasn't wrong. He didn't say anything for a moment. You know what Gerald needs? He finally said. Lily frowned. Gerald the rabbit. Does Gerald the rabbit need a friend? She considered this with complete seriousness. What kind of friend? I don't know. Maybe a hamster. There was a silence of approximately 2 seconds, and then Lily made a sound that was somewhere between a gasp and a laugh, and she said Dad. In that way she had. Like his name was both a question and an answer, and Sterling Vance drove his rattling, apple juice-smelling 2009 Nissan Frontier through the ordinary afternoon traffic of an ordinary Tuesday, with his daughter in the back seat, and a contract he would sign in 2 weeks, and a jacket his wife had picked out. And he thought that for the first time in a long time, something felt close to okay. The agreement with Meridian Health Partners was finalized 18 days later. Over the following 6 months, Sterling implemented a phased operational restructure that recovered $34 million in the first fiscal year, slightly under the optimistic projection, slightly over the conservative one, which was exactly the kind of outcome Sterling had learned to be honest about, because the alternative, overpromising, was what made people stop trusting consultants in the first place. Priya sent him a bottle of wine when the Q2 numbers came in. He texted thank you, and gave the bottle to his neighbor, who had been watching Lily on late days, because his neighbor had been watching Lily on late days for 8 months, without asking for anything. And Sterling believed in keeping accounts that weren't financial. Renata Sloan did not reach out directly. He had not expected her to. But 6 weeks after the contract was signed, Priya mentioned that Renata had quietly restructured the visitor intake protocol for the building. Credentials verified before arrival, not in a side corridor, not after the fact. No announcement, no explanation given publicly. Sterling thought about that for a moment when Priya told him. Just a moment. Then he moved on to the next thing on the agenda, because that was what you did. He still drives the Frontier. He has the means to replace it now, twice over, without stress. He looked at a few things online once, out of curiosity more than intention, and then stopped. Claire had ridden in that truck for 11 years. Lily had come home from the hospital in it. Some things carry more than weight, and more than history. They carry the shape of the life you built, and you don't trade that for a newer model, just because you can. Some mornings he still runs long on time, because Lily has opinions about breakfast, or because the school permission slips have multiplied, or because Gerald the rabbit, and yes, eventually, a hamster named Biscuit, requires attention before 7 a.m. Some mornings he makes it out the door with exactly enough time and not a minute more, but he always makes it. That part has not changed. And somewhere in the back of that battered truck, between the engineering folders and the crayon smell and the half-read children's book that has been on the back seat for 3 weeks, there is that looks smaller outside than it is. There is a man who has been underestimated many times, and has not stopped showing up anyway. There is a daughter who already knows, at 7 years old, what her mother knew. There is a jacket that still fits.